Let's get oral.
Howdy, howdy. Welcome back to Let's Get Oral.
Let's get oral.
I am Jonathan, one of your co-hosts here with the LGO team. And today we've got a classic recording happening because today it's just Camille and I. How you doing, Camille?
Woo! Hey, I'm great. It's fun to do the one-on-one again. Happy to take it all the way back to the fluoride debate.
I know.
Let's get oral.
We both knew that this was inevitably going to happen, and we've had intentions to chat about fluoride, as many of our peers and others in the blogosphere and podcast space has been doing, in addition to traditional media. But considering how emergent and relevant this topic is, I figured, why not? Let's do our part to talk about, in my opinion, I think a fairly cool ion from a chemistry perspective, but also one that has played a big role in public health, quite frankly, for better or worse.
Absolutely.
So today, I don't intend to do an hour-long lecture on fluoride, but I figured at least Camille and I could sit down and briefly chat about the origins and science and the current discussions and perception of this natural molecule. How does that sound?
It sounds great. If I could just set the early stage for oral care prior to fluoride, we had a lot of cosmeceuticals in the market that were a variety of different things. I would call them potions or maybe even snake oil. There was even a uranium toothpaste. We were really not doing people justice. We were doing some crazy stuff. So I think, you have to understand the time and place that fluoride originated to appreciate all of the amazing science that then came out of it and how much regard we had as an industry around this unique ion. So, yeah, it was a wild time. And I think we're headed back that way in some ways. So we can talk about that too.
Progress is not always linear. I think as many of us knows, especially students of history, it is a crazy sine wave.
Yeah.
in
Truly.
some ways. But yeah, today I'm excited to at least briefly debate and talk about the history of fluoride from a perspective of dentistry and oral care. As many of y'all know, it's in our toothpaste. It's most likely in your water and potentially in other spaces. And again, with intention of doing good things, but there also could be some potential harms depending on toxicity, dosage, and exposure. So what's the truth? Our goal is to help give you the context, or at least a little bit of data and insights from our perspective and experiences to contribute to this conversation. First, I like to start with history before diving into the science, because I think history plays a big role in this. So for those who don't know, back in the early 1900s, so over 100 years ago, there was a dentist by the name of Frederick Mackay, who was in the Colorado area, and he noticed while working with patients and particularly children that while they had relatively healthy teeth, they were stained. They had a lot of browning and discoloration. And that was an observation that he felt like over time was odd, considering while they didn't look healthy to that discoloration, they tend to have less cavities and decay compared to other patients Dr. McKay worked on in other regions around the US. So fast forward to the 30s, he collaborated with Dr. Green Black and then got to the federal level to start actually initiating some longitudinal studies to see whether or not this natural mineral or compound may play a role if you use it as an intervention for reducing tooth decay. So after performing these studies for many years and collaborating with the federal government, it was decided in 1945 in Grand Rapids that they would implement this program. And it was the first of its kind in the United States for fluoridating our water, because the children that they were observing had a reduction of caries, by 60%, which
Wow.
is astounding if you really think about it, right? Being able to use a naturally occurring mineral, introducing amounts of it at a quote unquote safe level that was, at least at the time, established being below 1 part per million, was sufficient to reduce tooth decay in children by 60%. It's the first of its kind of a public health intervention and program in dentistry and oral care that was able to produce such substantial results that quickly became adopted and utilized in many parts of the US and other parts of the world. And fast forward now, about 80 years later, now we are talking about why do we fluoridate our water? So that's why I like to start with the history, was because it went from an observation to what any good scientist or researcher will do. They come up with a hypothesis and they test it, and other people test against
Right.
it and see what the evidence suggests to them.
So a couple moving parts to this. Did they have any control arm of kids not exposed to fluoride in that study?
Yes, so they were able to observe children in the surrounding areas that did not have access to the same public source of water.
Okay.
And so that was their quote unquote natural control,
Sure.
by being able to see the differences in tooth decay rates in the children that had access to that fluoridated water versus
Right.
those in subsequent or surrounding areas that did not.
Right. So a couple things to keep in mind, I think, to consider was that at that time in the 1930s, a couple other things were happening. There was more of a concerted educational piece for the public to talk about how oral hygiene was important and that could improve the amount of cavities that you might develop over time. And so while that campaign was happening, this study was happening. And so that often comes up as a criticism in that people were just more aware. And so potentially those patients in that area were more educated and were doing more oral hygiene anyway, which is a possibility. The other kind of pieces to think about are safe levels of fluoride. Our ability to measure safety has changed over the years. So, like, there's this Ames test that we use to understand if something is cancer causing. That wasn't developed until the 70s. So, our methods improve as we understand more and more about our health and health systems. Currently, we're realizing that our metabolic health is a real intricate and messy place. And we're realizing some of the compounds that we always thought were safe are now maybe not as safe as we thought they were. So we're always learning in this space. And I think that's a really key piece to keep in mind as we move through these studies. I think that, we have continued to show in the research community that fluoride has been relatively safe. And we can get into the nuance of that. And always, dose is what makes the toxin. So those are all just important pieces to keep in mind. We know that water is essential for life, but can be a toxin as well. So they're just, a lot to move through as far as what the data is telling us at this time.
Exactly. Like you said, water could be harm. Air,
Right. Yes.
depending on its composition and dosing, could also be of harm.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Like many other natural things. With that said, I think it's a good place to transition to talking briefly about just like the basic chemistry and science of fluoride itself. And so to quickly address that, what is fluoride? As we mentioned at the top, it is a naturally occurring mineral found in soil, in the waters, in our foods, and other places throughout this beautiful planet we call Earth. But what makes it such a fascinating compound, I'm not going to dive into the periodic table and talk about its chemistry when it becomes.
Oh, come on.
I would like to, because that's where it's really cool. But to keep it generic, fluoride its utility is useful when it comes to oral health because of its anti-caries properties. And you could sum that up into 2 or 3 mechanisms. One, it can inhibit tooth demineralization or inhibit the metabolism of the bacteria that produces the acids from sugar metabolism. So that's one way it's able to directly or indirectly reduce or prevent caries. It is also a compound that it can promote tooth remineralization due to its chemistry. Fluoride, it typically is combined with sodium. So if you look at your toothpaste, you might see like sodium fluoride or stannous fluoride or some other crazy chemical name, depending on how you look at it. So it, as a whole, fluoride is a compound with the fluorine ion present. But whenever you have the hydroxyapatite, which is a natural component of our enamel, when that starts to interact with the acids that the bacteria produce in our mouth, the acids will break those down into calcium and phosphate molecules. And this is where the fluoride shines because due to its chemistry, it is able to combine or bind with the calcium and phosphate ions in a way that can then be reabsorbed by the tooth enamel. And what's really fascinating about this mechanism is it is actually stronger in this form than the original hydroxyapatite.
Can I ask, if I'm thinking chemistry wise, I'm thinking of competition for uptake, like hydroxyapatite versus fluoride. I believe that the uptake for fluoride is more efficient and more effective than the hydroxyapatite. Is that true? Do you recall?
That is what I recall. I do look forward to speaking with some proper chemist about this in more detail on a future episode. But that's one of the beauties of a compound when it comes to fluoride and the mechanisms in its mouth is it's how quickly it is able to be utilized by the toothed animal while these things are all happening in real time. It's one thing for us to talk about the mechanisms here, but when they are actually taking place in our mouth, that time scale can be quickly accelerated or decelerated depending on the resolution we're looking at here. And so the moment, say, for example, you drink some lemonade, it's nice and tart and acidic, you're enjoying that sip, that the acid and the sugars present in there are being interacted with the bugs in our mouth and the buffering capacity of our saliva in real time. And so the presence of fluoride there can behave a bit more quickly from a preventative perspective than the hydroxyapatite that's already present in our enamel.
Now I'm thirsty. You made me thirsty.
With that said, though, we do know that, of course, this fluoride can come from different places. It's one thing to talk about the application of fluoride in topicals, such as toothpaste, mouthwashes, lozenges, or some form of like a supplement versus...
Right. Well, the kid supplements are, an oral that you would just chew and swallow or just enjoy in your mouth for some time.
Whereas you also have, of course, systemic consumption coming from our water sources.
Yeah. Or our food products that are made with water, obviously.
Right. So, I mean, I know I'm on the West Coast, but some of us like to have debates about why pizza and from place X is better than
the
others.
Fluoride.
It's the fluoride. It's definitely the water, but maybe the fluoride plays a role in that.
You never know. We haven't done that controlled study. I do want to point out the difference between sodium fluoride and stannous fluoride. In the original fluoride that was available for oral hygiene, it was stannous fluoride. That was the rollout. And all of the studies that we have in gingivitis and anti-cavities, caries, are all with stannous fluoride in those beginning years. And what is remarkable about stannous fluoride is how efficacious it is, at reducing cavities, but also reducing gingivitis. And I think that that is an important distinction. And this is a formulation issue. So stannous fluoride continues to be improved upon over the years, because originally it would stain your teeth like those Montana kids. They had brown staining over time from using stannous fluoride. Kind of annoying if the whole goal is to have nice teeth, right? So they finally successfully developed a sodium fluoride that was stable enough and also gave the anti-cavities benefit, but they lost the anti-gingivitis benefit, which is interesting. So one of the things that I had looked at in my studies was the active stannous component, separate from fluoride, in its ability to manage gingivitis, which is a whole other story and not fluoride related. But anyway, that's just a side piece in that we do have different fluoride compounds in our hygiene products. And that is why, because stannous fluoride tends to give you staining over time. And I would say that the products out today really don't do that so much, but it is still possible.
Right. And so depending on where you live or where you get your toothpaste and whatnot, and the way your water levels are fluoridated or not, right? There's so much variability at the end of the day when it comes to our exposure and, dare I say, consumption
Absolutely.
of fluoride in our day-to-day life and how it is interacting with us and within us.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to then talk about some of the criticisms and concerns. Where has the science or the discussion led us lately to focus more on these topics?
Well, there's always been kind of a reevaluation as we understand more about our bodies to reassess things that we think are safe and effective when we start to understand different other processes, like our metabolic health, for example. And fluoride keeps coming up because we have this continual exposure, and it can be widely variable. So one of the first indications that came forward to show that fluoride maybe wasn't amazing was just the white spot lesions that you got from having too much fluoride exposure. So we're guessing too much fluoridated water, too much of fluoride hygiene products. So we're calling that fluorosis. And the problem with fluorosis is, okay, so it's just, we think, oh, it's just happening to our teeth. But the amount of exposure that you would need to get dental fluorosis is probably suggesting that you also have fluorosis in your bones. So some of our metabolic studies show that the uptake of fluoride as you digest it is so efficient that your initial exposure goes into your skeletal and enamel tissues at a rate of 90%, which is incredibly effective. And so a low-level exposure, maybe you get stronger teeth, maybe you get stronger bones, but when you're moving into fluorosis where you have too much, then all of a sudden you're thinking brittle bones and brittle teeth that are too hard to substantiate the pressures that they're under every day. So that was kind of our first indication that there was something possibly amiss. And then because we know that, fluoride in general, we're using it all the time. It is a very small ion. What else could it possibly be doing? And so there was always a low-level criticism for putting it in something as essential as a water supply. And so people continued to be pretty critical of this not necessarily accepted exposure. Not everybody I think everybody wants a choice to expose themselves or not. And so one of the things that I think is hard to uncouple when looking through all of these studies, we have epidemiological studies, and then we have cell-based studies. And both of them have their issues and implications. So epidemiological studies are broad studies that are looking at typically areas that are naturally contaminated with fluoride. Yes, there's naturally occurring fluoride, but there's also contaminated areas that have lots of fluoride, high levels. And so we'll compare those people in those areas with people in separate areas that don't have that natural exposure. But oftentimes, thematic in these epidemiological studies, places that have high fluoride are also socioeconomically challenged. They have less access to oral care. They have poorer diets generally. They have other toxins in the environment like arsenic and lead. And so all of these factors kind of make those studies messy. And the assumption is it's the fluoride exposure or the proximity to fluoride exposure. But in truth, in reality, there's so much more happening in those areas that is harder to control for. And so that's the criticism for most of those epidemiological studies. And then we have our cell-based studies. So, I mean, I grew up at the bench. I love a cell-based study. But when we're talking about our systemic systems, it gets complicated fast. And though we can understand at the cellular level what a specific chemical might be doing, it's unfair to confer that activity to a whole body system because we have so many protections in our bodies. So one example I like to give is just having epithelial cells. So these are the cells that kind of protect us, line our bodies, give us a barrier function. If you expose them in a tissue culture assay to just toothpaste in general, even a non-fluoride toothpaste, it will disrupt the entire layer. But if you add another cell type to it, like a macrophage or a neutrophil, that will protect that system. The two of those cells together will all of a sudden be very resilient. And now you can test very low levels of this hygiene product, for example. And I think that, once you've added whole organs and blood flow and serum components, all of a sudden you have this very complex system that is now very resilient when exposed to different types of products. So I think that that's something to keep in mind as well. And that we really need to understand whole system exposures. And so I would say that a lot of the studies you can kind of throw out on those terms. Yes, it's important to get kind of an understanding for risk from some of these studies, but then it's really important to move to the next level and understand the systems approach. And when we do that, the low levels of fluoride exposure really become not such a huge deal. We're really talking about high chronic exposure that becomes the issue. So if we're thinking maybe that it's not in our water supply and maybe we're choosing a non-fluoride toothpaste, our exposure is going to be really insignificant. And so these are just pieces to keep in mind. But that said, we've historically thought that fluoride is so safe that never have we cautioned pregnant women to avoid it. And so when a study came out evaluating women during pregnancy and evaluating their urine for fluoride, now this is a whole systems approach. This is obviously they have some urine excretion of fluoride. And this is important because I told you that the metabolic uptake was extremely efficient. So this is a 90% uptake, very efficient, going into our bones and teeth, and they're still excreting some. So that's a high level. And that their children were affected with slightly lower IQ, that suggests that there are some impacts to biology that are definitely unattractive and put a cautionary label on the whole works. So I think that it would be fair to remove from the water supply. And I say this with a lot of reservation because I do think that fluoride is still beneficial. I just don't think we should maybe put it in our pregnant women, pregnant peoples. I think that we should have control over our doses. But I also think that, chronic exposure, we can absolutely limit. We have all sorts of technology to continue to use fluoride in a very safe way with varnishes. But I think that we should complement the fluoride removal from our waters with a better approach to dental coverage. And so if we're not going to protect our people in a nationwide setting of water fluoridation, then we should compensate. But that's my personal opinion on that. And I think it's an important one because we know how important oral health is. And I think that it is an essential part of healthcare. So to have the silo that it remains to be is frustrating.
It really is. And you did a great job of illustrating the complexities of the fluoride journey from how the research started 100 years ago or so to then the lack of attention until more recently and doing it was like retroactive meta-analysis and seeing its impact on different populations at different stages of life and weighing all of that when you look at the quote unquote public and systemic benefits water fluoridation or systemic fluoridation has done versus the individual effects, the variable effects that certain people may experience, right? It's so nuanced. There's so much to, be tempted to try to decouple because to your point, like as an individual, right, and thinking about individual liberalism, right? Yes, I would like to have the choice.
Yeah, right.
At the end of the day, while at the same time understanding the benefit that some fluoridation can have systemically for society or communities. Right. But yeah, how does one weigh that? And what does that look like, at least, here in the United States? Like, from my understanding, is it the states? Is it the cities? Is it the municipalities?
Yes,
that
and yes.
make that choice on the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's, I think, what I see at the foundation of all this is like education, right? Education awareness goes such a long ways to be able to engage in this conversation confidently.
Right. Well,
right.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. Right. And also without fear mongering, I think it's,
that's where I was going.
Yeah. I also want to say that not everybody is going to be affected by cavities. So there are just some people who are resistant. Is it their buffering capacity in their saliva? Yes, maybe. Is it their enamel strength? Yes, maybe. It's like there are so many factors. And so to make the broad assumption, well, I think that we can make the broad assumption in socioeconomically challenged places, but does that mean that we also make the decision for them to be fluoridated? I don't know that that's the case because there is risk now. So I think that having some, backup plan for this inevitable weakness in health structure, I think should be addressed a new way. But to say that, we all needed fluoride is a myth. I think that our diet is an issue. I think that our food products that are very available and all of our food deserts play a role in this. So, there are 1,000 things to kind of track, but not everybody's going to have a cavities issue.
Yeah. So where do we go next? Or, how do we progress from the current state of the state when it comes to fluoride?
Well, I mean, we did briefly mention hydroxyapatite and, are there other ways to address the issue? I think that, having some public health aspects put forward that are meaningful, having insurance coverage that is combined with our whole health. I don't think dental should be separate, for example. I think that pharmaceutical success has shown us that different molecules can work better for different people. And so there are different reasons why some of us have cavities than others. Sometimes we have more acid producers. Sometimes we have a poor buffering capacity. Sometimes we just have a weaker structure in general. And all of those would benefit from a different therapeutic approach. So again, I think that we need to find more pathways through regulatory. It's been a significant hurdle, and that's its own episode. The regulatory space is absolutely ridiculous for something that should be a very affordable product on the other side. It's just cost preventative, honestly.
Yeah.
Along the lines of new antimicrobials, quite frankly. So I think that we just have to have a different process in place to understand how to get those to everybody. Because I think the innovation's there. I think we know enough. But to get a claim out of the FDA is just impossible.
Yeah. Yes, that's...
Yeah. I fear that we're moving into snake oils again, but I do think there are a lot of really cool technologies already in market that do address a lot of these issues. It's just that we can't make any claims on them. And so we're left with people just trying to find their own path in the product landscape. And so hopefully we won't come across uranium toothpaste anytime soon, but but here we are now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the regulatory landscape definitely doesn't help. But yeah, to your point, support what you said. Like, I think there's enough tools and innovations and evidence to show if we're able to have the regulatory framework support these, dare I say, personalized approaches when it comes to managing oral and systemic health, we could really, I think, make that much more progress that doesn't isolate public health efforts from individual care.
Right. So I don't know what we spend on water fluoridation, but maybe we could just pivot that money to something more meaningful. Suggestion. Yeah. I don't know.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, this was helpful for me, right? Again, learning a bit more about the history and where that work has guided the public efforts. And then also how that data and analysis has shown us where the weak spots are.
Yeah.
This implementation. But I do really look forward to us continuing this conversation when we think about toxicity and exposure with a toxicologist.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. We're hosting a toxicologist. His name is Craig, and we have both worked with him. He is a force to be had, and he is very much on the fence of fluoride is a good thing. And I want to both challenge him, but also show us, safe ways to behave with it. Because I think all of that is where we're headed. And so, how do we move forward in this landscape? Is hydroxyapatite enough as a supplement? I don't believe it will be the best thing. I think it will be a part of a good thing.
Yeah.
Because with hydroxyapatite, we have found that as a way to replace fluoride, it can work. It's not as efficient, and formulation matters. And that creates a messy understanding for the consumer when there are so many products in market with hydroxyapatite. But if you understand the formulation issues, immediately that most of them are a no-go. Which is devastating, right? You can't just buy a hydroxyapatite toothpaste and say, good to go, because you'd be wrong. And that's unfortunate because I think everybody in this space is trying to do the right thing. But
Agreed.
As the science comes out, it gets a little bit more complicated and a lot more frustrating. So TBD, we'll have a nice conversation with Craig very shortly. So I look forward to bringing you that.
Likewise. Well, once again, thank you, Camille, for the education, bringing us to light of the state of the state when it comes to fluoride.
Likewise.
It's always fun being able to tackle these topics. And I know while you and I on, offline chat about this stuff a lot, it's glad to get back to our OG format.
Yeah.
But just
for
kicking
sure.
it is hitting record and chatting. So we're going to continue this conversation with Craig on a following episode. And I'm sure there'll be more to come, because I think this is not going to stop anytime soon. And I think that's a good thing. I do think it is important for us to be collectively thinking about, why do we do what we do? Why do we put these things in our systems, in our bodies, the way that we do?
Right.
Because that's kind of the whole point of science inquiry.
Right. Absolutely. And we're all here for that, right? I hope.
Yep.
I am.
Yep. We are open-minded here at LGO, that's for sure.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to talk again. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. And until next time, thank you for listening. It's Jonathan and Camille here at Let's Get Oral.
Let's get oral.